Good evening on this slightly drizzly, beautiful May 14th evening. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm Marty Coffin-Evans. I'm president of our Boulder Rotary Club. Joining me to my left, Brad Lesh, is the president of the Boulder Valley Club. We're delighted to be able to co-host this event. Our Rotary Club meets on Friday noon in the JCC, and actually Brad's club meets here tomorrow at noon. So he's going to do the honors, and Wentworth, thank you, and do enjoy the evening.
Great. Thank you all for being here. Just a couple of quick people to acknowledge prior to starting. I wanted to thank Constance Holden. Constance, where are you? Oh, there she is in the back. And Carl Kurtz for putting this together. And I also wanted to thank, go ahead. And I wanted to thank Kit Hollingshead and Carl for moderating this as well. So I know we're all here to hear what our panelists have to say. I thank all the panelists for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Kit and Carl now.
Good evening and welcome to the first ever second congressional debate held in conjunction with the Boulder Rotary Club and the Boulder Valley Rotary Club. My name is Kit Hollingshead. Sitting with me is Carl Kurtz. I'm with the Boulder Valley Rotary Club. Carl's with the Boulder Rotary Club. And I want to thank the candidates for being here tonight for their commitment to public service. It's a significant thing that they're doing, and it takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there like this. To allow maximum time for the candidates to get their message out to you, we're requesting that any questions that you might have for the candidates be submitted in writing. There are postcards, or 3x5 cards going around, and along with pens. So if you want to ask a question to the candidates, not to a particular candidate, but to the candidates, write it on a card, and people will come and collect them. We're going to sort through them. There's a lot of questions that can be answered. We have a short period of time. So hold up your index card when you have your question filled out, and somebody will come and pick it up. We won't cover multiple questions on the same topic. So if you've already heard that topic being raised, we want to get to as many topics as we can. We have 5 candidates. Each candidate has 2 minutes to answer the question. So time is of the essence. So we're going to ask the candidates also to keep their answers brief. To maintain decorum, we're going to ask that the audience to show their support, refrain from clapping. You can use your jazz hands. But please refrain from clapping and refrain from taking any time away from the candidates, if you would, please. And candidates, you're expected to keep your answers brief and concise. And before we sat down tonight, we drew numbers to see who goes first with their 4-minute opening remarks. And we have you seated in that order. After the opening remarks, the number 2 person will answer the first question. The number 3 person will answer the number 3 question the number 2 question through the night. Our timekeeper sitting in the front here is Joffrey Wheeler. You will be able to see when he holds up the yellow sign. The yellow sign means the candidates, you have 30 seconds left. When Joffrey holds up the red sign, your time has expired. Please just finish your sentence so that we can get on with the next questions and answers. We strongly suggest that you answer the question that has been asked. However, there will be times when I'm sure you'll want to make a statement regarding something somebody else has said to a previous question. Please keep in mind that you're here to get your information and the answers to the questions we're asking out to the public tonight. Without further ado, let's get started with opening remarks. And starting our opening remarks with 4 minutes, Nick Thomas.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll take questions from the table, but I wanted to start by standing up here. I appreciate greatly this forum and everybody here tonight. This is particularly special and relevant to me as my father was a Rotarian member here in Boulder for many years. My younger brother did a Rotary exchange program that brought him to Taiwan, where he met my new sister-in-law from Bogota. And I actually started China's first Rotaract, which is a Rotary for kids, while I was living in Shanghai doing my MBA. Thank you, too, for bringing it together and for the Rotary groups for doing so. This is particularly pertinent to the moment we're in, given Rotary has, in my opinion, two significant focuses, one on geopolitical issues and one on service. And I'll tell you, for starters, I launched into this campaign because of service. I happened to be out in DC last June, around the 12th, and was working with USGLC, which is the Global Leadership Coalition. They lobby on behalf of the international affairs budget. So they believe in soft power as well as the military, a mix of smart power. And on one of the days that we were out there meeting with different members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, one of the few bipartisan organizations still active in DC, there was a shooting at a baseball game, at the baseball practice. A young man walked up to the Republican practice field and said, "Are you Democrats or are you Republicans?" And when one of the aides walking away said, "This is the Republican practice field," he pulled out a weapon and opened fire on the field. And that was such a strong statement to me on the tribalism, on where our culture has gotten, on what has happened to respect and appreciation for people of the other side. I may disagree with every one of the issues, but I respect you as a human and your beliefs in seeing them. And that event, 2 days later, I went to the baseball game. I sat in the stands with John Lewis. We talked about the events of that day, and I thought, you know, the most important thing I can do right now to serve my community would be to return to Colorado and run as an independent for CD2. And so that's why I got into it. On the geopolitical side, I did a master's in international. Well, I did a BA in political science up at CSU. I was born here in Boulder, Colorado, raised right around this area. I see so many friends and family in the audience as well, which is really special. And then I did a master's in international diplomacy at the University of Denver, where I studied, again, under the auspices of previous people such as Madeleine Albright and Condi Rice, once again seeing that people could come together even if they disagreed on viewpoint. And then I went off and worked. I spent time traveling and working in 70 different countries around the world. I've lived on 4 continents in doing that. And my most recent job was working in geopolitics, both with a focus on China and a focus on Egypt, trying to repair relations, particularly in Egypt in the last 2.5 years as it's continued to dive. And we see some of that going on in the Middle East right now. And then in China, which my father, who teaches at CU Denver for the last 40 years in East Asian Studies, I sort of followed in his direction on that. So I'm running as an independent because being socially progressive and fiscally responsible is something that applies to the majority of us. Most of us believe that there are things that we overlap on, and we know that. But the tribalism today of the Democrats versus the Republicans have gotten to the point where it's out of hand. And so I appreciate doing this. I appreciate you all having me here, and I'm looking forward to these questions. Thank you.
Joe, go ahead.
Well, good evening, and thank you all for having us tonight. Thank you to the Boulder Rotary. I very much appreciate the opportunity to come and visit with you all here this evening. My name is Joe Neguse, and I'd like to be your next congressman. I'm running as a Democrat here in the 2nd Congressional District. One of my first public speeches, actually, was at a Boulder Rotary event, an evening event for a scholarship program here in Boulder when I was student body president at the University of Colorado at Boulder 13 years ago, I should say. And I'm very much appreciative of the work that Rotary does here in Boulder and across really the globe. I, just by way of background, have spent most of my life here in Colorado. I grew up here. I went to public schools here. I went to CU undergrad and law school. I met my wife here. We live in Lafayette now. We're welcoming our first child to the world in just a few months in August, a baby girl. So I'm a Coloradan through and through. I also have had a unique opportunity to serve our state, both as a regent at the University of Colorado. I was elected in 2008 and served for 6 years representing this congressional district, fighting for students and faculty and workers at the University of Colorado to try to make higher education more accessible. as the co-founder of our state's largest youth nonprofit. It's called New Era Colorado. Some of you might be familiar with it here in Boulder. We've registered over 150,000 voters, young voters, right here in our state. And most recently in the governor's cabinet, where I led the state's Consumer Protection Agency for 2 years, working to fight financial fraud and to protect the civil rights of each and every Coloradan in our state. So I've been lucky and very proud to have served our state and to be a Coloradan. But like many folks in this room, I suspect, my story is an immigrant story. My parents are not from the United States. They came here from a small, war-torn country that most folks have never heard of called Eritrea. They came here as refugees over 35 years ago. And thanks to their sacrifice and really the incredible freedoms and the opportunities that we have here in the United States, they've been able to make it, and we've been able to live the American dream in every sense of that phrase. And I'm running for Congress because I firmly believe that those freedoms and those opportunities are under threat like they've never been before. And I suspect I'm preaching to the choir, but I really do worry that the fate of our republic right now is on the line. And I am running for Congress to be a part of really the fight to resist what is happening in Washington, D.C. with this reckless administration, and to fight for our shared values in our nation's capital, and really to protect our rights fundamentally as Coloradans and as Americans. The right to be able to earn a living wage, the right to be able to send your kids to quality, well-funded public schools, the right to health care so that no family goes bankrupt if, God forbid, a loved one gets sick, and ultimately the right to breathe clean air and drink clean water and enjoy the public lands here in Boulder County and across our state that are held in trust for us and by us and for the future generations that'll succeed us. And as I mentioned, while I've been very fortunate to have worked to protect those rights here in our state, to me, right now, the fight for the soul of our country is in the halls of the United States Congress. And so I feel compelled to be a part of that fight and to go to Washington to fight for the voters of this congressional district. I look forward to the questions tonight. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to come here tonight. Thank you.
Roger Barris is up next.
Well, let me join everybody else and say thank you. Thank you for inviting us, and thank you for hosting this forum. I feel like I have to ask this question. Does everyone know what a libertarian is? And I have to ask this question because the other day I was at a Cinco de Mayo celebration, and a guy walked past our booth and he said, "You libertarians, you're just Republicans who like dope." No. It's not true. Not true. Now, it is true. It is true that we have some of the values that the Republican Party pretends to support, or at least they pretend to support when they're not in power. Things like small government, cutting taxes and spending, fiscal responsibility, free trade. But I can guarantee you that no libertarian administration would have cut taxes and then immediately signed a $1.3 trillion budget or expenditure bill that busted every spending cap on the horizon. Now, on social matters, we tend to be a little closer to the Democrats. But there's a difference there as well, because our belief in social matters is driven by our fundamental desire and our fundamental belief in individual liberty and individual rights, not political expediency, which means that we usually get there way before our Democratic friends do. Take marriage equality, for example. That finally made it into the Democratic platform in 2016. It's been in our platform since 1972. Now the entire world has decided that we're no longer going to throw people in cages for smoking marijuana cigarettes, right? Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have come out and courageously said they want to repeal or they want to legalize marijuana at the federal level. That has also been in our platform since 1972. And since we take a principled view, although we support gay marriage, we don't think anybody should be forced to bake a cake for one. Likewise, although we support a woman's right to choose, we don't think anybody should be taxed to pay for her choice. And finally, because we think that the most fundamental right of all is the right to defend yourself, we are strong supporters of the Second Amendment. Now let's shift gears. I am Roger Barris, and I am the Libertarian Party candidate for CD2. After a 30-year career as an investor and an entrepreneur, which ended with me creating my own company and then selling it, I am now retired. That means, like many of you out there, I have created jobs, I've met a payroll, and I've kept my clients happy. And like many of you, I realize how difficult the government makes all three of those things. It also means that I am not, nor will I ever be, a professional politician. And I think the founders of this country are rolling over in their graves at the thought of to the extent to which professional political class has taken over our republic. Now, I am running on three major themes. Theme number one is stop the wars. They are not making us more secure. In fact, they're making us less secure. They are bankrupting the country, and they are destroying our young. Promise number two, cut taxes, but also cut spending. Because a tax cut without a spending cut is only a tax deferral, and we're deferring it onto the shoulders of our own children. Promise number three, I want a federal government so small that we don't fight over it anymore. Because the reality is we have weaponized the federal government. And the reason we are fighting so heavily over it now, the reason it divides us is because we must stop doing that. We must disarm. That is the only path to ending the divisiveness that everyone is commenting on. Thank you again for inviting me, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Peter Yu.
Thank you so much to the Boulder Rotary Club for having me here tonight, Clay and Kurt. It's an honor to be here tonight. And just so you guys know, I'm really excited. I'm a big fan of Boulder. I can tell you a bunch of stories, but one story I do need to tell you is that when I graduated high school in 1990, I had a monster desire to go to the University of Colorado and play football, obviously because they were the best football team in the country at that time. I used to hound Gary Barnett, who was the offensive coordinator at the time, to say, hey, come let me play football there. I'm an all-state running back. Give me a shot. Not only to mention that, the love of my life, who's sitting right here in front row, she was going to see you as well. Unfortunately, Coach Barnett didn't care that love of my life came here, and he did not want a 150-pound running back to play for the national champions. So that being said, I never lost my love for CU or the city of Boulder. And so I'm extremely honored to be here today. A little bit about myself. My name is Peter Yu, and I am the Republican candidate. However, I hate to sit there and say I'm the Republican candidate. I hate for Nick to say it, independent, Democrat, libertarian. I think we're part of the problem we have in this country is we have too much identity politics right now. We need to come together if we're ever going to be able to move forward. And that's the truth. And I know what this country is about, how great this country is. My family immigrated here just like Joe's did, and I'm sure everyone else did eventually. Back in 1969, my mom and dad and my 6 brothers and sisters. And despite the fact that they were poor, broke, and hungry, why they had another child, I have no idea. I like to say that they kept having more children until they got it right. And I think they got it right with me. So, but the thing that's really great about America is that it treats everyone equally. It gives everyone the same opportunity, and it is fair. And for our family who grew up most of our life in poverty, for us to be able to accomplish what we've been able to accomplish is something truly amazing that's only possible in this country. We have 7 children. Out of those 7, 5 of us were able to get ourselves through college and get a college degree. The other 2, they were just too busy working to keep us alive. And if you look at all 7 children today, we're all doing amazing in life. We may not be multimillionaires by any chance, but we are living the American dream, as Joe said. And we know it's because of this country. And that's the reason why I am running, because with the national debt now of $21 trillion, and Roger spoke a lot about this in regards to national debt, we can no longer be irresponsible and turn a blind eye to what our deficit is. We are currently 107% of debt to GDP right now. We are on a fast track to causing a society that's not going to be the country we remember. And we need to make sure we focus on that. So guess what? So that your children, your children's children have the exact same opportunity that I had, that these gentlemen had, that all of you had. And for us to completely just continue to mortgage our future and ignore what's going on in our society, it's wrong. And as a proud citizen of this country, who is so thankful and loves everything about this great nation, it's important for me to make sure that I can help you guys all out as well. Career-wise, I've had 20 plus years in corporate America. I've taken some of the worst departments and organizations and put them in places that the best in the industry. And what I would like to do is basically take the opportunities that I've been able to achieve and apply those back all to you. Thank you very much.
Mark Williams.
Thanks to all of you for being here tonight, and it's a pleasure to join the Rotary Club in this wonderful dialogue of candidates here for the 2nd District. And thanks to these 4 gentlemen as well for running. Much appreciated to have this kind of talent running for office. I want to welcome all of you, and I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm running for Congress. I'm not a career politician, and I saw what happened in 2016, and I said, something needs to change. And in my mind, both the Democrats and the Republicans own this problem. And so looking at the career politicians who are out there and who have done so much damage to us in the way these folks have explained, I decided that it was time to serve my country again. And I feel very strongly that it's time for citizen candidates to step forward and start changing the dialogue in this wonderful country of ours. Let me give you a little bit of my history. I grew up in South America, the son of a Spanish immigrant, and I learned all about the difference between the rich and the poor, seeing the difference between countries where there was a very few privileged elite wealthy and then a mass of poor people that didn't have the same opportunities. And in 2016, seeing what happened on the heels of the 2008 recession, you could see that that's where our country was going. So that was very important to me in terms of my decision. And after I left Latin America and I came to the United States, I went to school back east, and then I wound up in the Air Force. I was a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and I served in the Gulf. On the first night when you guys were watching everything on the TV, I was there going across the border with 8 other F-15s. On the heels of the Gulf, I left there. I became a reserve analyst in the intelligence community in the Air Force. And I supported strategic analysis in the Korean Peninsula, and I also did a bunch of work in the Department of Justice, interdicting human and narcotics smuggling along the border. So for me, that was very important and formative in terms of understanding the dynamics that are happening in the international realm. Locally, after I left the Air Force, I went and flew for the airlines, and then at some point, I decided I wanted to go back to school, and so I decided to come to Boulder, and I'm the first and last fighter pilot that probably ever went through Naropa. And so, you know, it was a phenomenal experience. And, you know, on the heels of that, I went into the startup community. Now, I've done startups in the world of healthcare. I've done startups in the world of big data and AI. I've done startups in streaming video, and I run my own consulting business at the intersection of performance and mindfulness. So I understand business, I understand government, and I understand how important it is to look to the future. My plank, the reason I'm running, is quite straightforward. I want politics for the people, not the powerful or the privileged. That to me is at the very top. And what does that mean? That means no money from PACs, special interests, lobbyists, or DC insiders. And I'm the only Democrat on this stage that can say that. The second thing for me is leveling the playing field for ordinary working folks. We need the same opportunities and legislation passed for us, that same that was passed for the 1%. And finally, it's about climate change and banning fracking and changing what's happening in terms of how we're doing extracting fuels and accelerating the transition to renewables. I want a different kind of leadership. I want a leadership that moves not just from the creativity of the head or the courage from the gut. Resistance is not enough. We need a renewal in politics that brings people together and that moves also from the heart with a compassion that reaches out to those who feel like they haven't been heard or touched. And that's the leadership I want to bring to Congress.
Now we'll jump right into the question and answer section of this forum. The first question will be answered by, all questions will be answered by all the candidates, but we're going to rotate the order in which they go through. Joe, you're going to answer this one first. What actions do you think Congress should take to support a vibrant economy in both the United States and Colorado?
So a couple of things I would say. I think some of the candidates have alluded to this. There's no question that income inequality is a huge concern and issue in our country and here in our state. One can find it right in every community in this congressional district. In an economy where 1% of our country ultimately owns 90% of the wealth, or certainly more wealth than 90% of our population, in a country where worker productivity has increased steadily since 1948, and yet wage stagnation is abhorrent, I think it's incumbent upon the Congress to do something about it. So there are a couple of things I would suggest. First, a living wage, a $15 minimum wage tied to inflation, so that people here in Boulder, people in Lafayette, where my wife and I live, and across this district can actually earn a living and be able to pay their mortgage and send their kids to great schools. Paid family leave. There is a bill pending in the Congress right now by Congressman Ro Khanna, which is a bill that I would certainly support. We've had family medical leave for many years in our country, since the early 1990s when President Clinton signed the FMLA Act. But as you all know, it is unpaid, not paid leave, something that my wife and I know all too well as we think about the birth of our first child. In addition, I think that there are a number of things that we could do to strengthen the ability for workers to be able to unionize and ultimately leverage their bargaining power so that we can ensure better working conditions for the people who work here in our country. So those are just a few examples of, I think, federal specific statutes that our Congress could enact that would have a dramatic effect, in my view, on our economy here, both in our state and in the country at large.
Thank you. Feel free to just continue on down the...
Okay. Well, I'm tempted to say just do the opposite of everything that Joe just said, but I don't think that's an appropriate response. What do I think? First off, the economy is doing pretty well right now. I think we can all acknowledge that. But what is shocking about the effect that the economy is doing pretty well right now is that even though it is doing pretty well, we are on the verge of trillion-dollar deficits. Right? We have never seen that before. We, as Peter pointed out before, we've already built up a huge debt that's something that we're going to pass on to our children, and that's only the debt that we have on balance sheet. That's not talking about all the other debts that we have off balance sheet. As I said before, we've never had a circumstance where the economy has been doing as well as it is now, and we are on the verge of trillion-dollar deficits. That's never happened before. So that's one of the first things I would do, because that is something that's a burden we're passing on to the young, and there's also plenty of evidence that that actually affects economic performance in today's terms, because people know that eventually that is going to have to be paid off, and they start anticipating that right now. That's number one. Number two is that we've made some important steps, actually. The current administration has done a few good things. One of the things it's done is it has started to do some important deregulation, but it's not nearly enough. It's not nearly fast enough. That's another thing that we can do that would be enormously helpful. In terms of the another thing, but this is less at the federal government, this is more at the state government level. We talk a lot about economic opportunity. One of the things that we could have done in this state, matter of fact, somebody on this table could have done, is we could have done something about occupational licensing, which is something that restricts the ability of particularly young, poor, and frequently immigrant communities to move up in their life. And then finally, we'll talk about this a lot later, we have to do something about our education system, because it is already affecting our economy, and it's going to be an enormous drag on our ability to perform in the future.
This is interesting because we have 5 candidates up here, and I like everyone up here, but I'm going to have to disagree with a lot of them. So just know that's going to happen a lot tonight. I'm sure they'll disagree with me as well. In regards to stimulating our economy and making sure that we can always have job growth, and so people can actually stand on their own 2 feet and not rely on the government, it's one of the things that I care about most. When you look at the federal level, there are so many government regulation out there that really hinders business growth. Small businesses, which basically comprise 80 to 90% of all the jobs created, are being hampered over the last basically 5 to 8 years with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which basically locked banks up where they couldn't lend money out. Businesses couldn't expand. They couldn't grow. They placed so many fines on banks that they were scared to even do any kind of lending. When you come look at our state levels, and me working in so many corporations, I've been handcuffed by so many of the current, for one, the Obamacare employee mandate regulation, where basically if you do hire someone, you got to give them full insurance benefits. I was hampered nonstop with the 4929 rule. And for those of you who don't know what that rule is, well, guess what? You hire 50 employees, you got to give them full benefits. Well, guess what? Most small businesses can't even handle that, so what do? They hire employees, but they only give them 20-something hours. And that's the main reason why our millennials, our future generation, is so handcuffed. When you sit there and think about our college graduates, they can't get the jobs they want because companies won't give them full-time jobs. When you sit there and think about the fact that they're only working 20, how can they get that experience? And that's what we need to focus on, making sure that government does do proper regulation, make sure that people aren't going out of control, but also make sure they're not destructive in holding back our growth of our economy.
So, when I hear our Republican and Libertarian friends say to keep cutting regulations, I go, what happened in 2008? And what about all those E. coli outbreaks? So no offense to anybody at the table, but I'm a little complete in terms of the deregulation argument. And I guess for me, the question about the economy is, yeah, the economy is growing like gangbusters, but who out here is not feeling a lot of squeeze? And so for me, it's about let's level the playing field. And if it's about leveling the playing field, then inquiring minds should ask, how come it's not level? And what I would say is for the last 50 years, say since Ronald Reagan, there's been a gross redistribution of wealth towards the upper income. And I, for one, believe it's time to stop that. Now, you know, Joe suggested some great legislation, and I'm behind all those pieces of legislation. But to me, there's a much bigger question. And the question is, when the Democrats were in power, why were they involved in deregulating banks? When the Democrats were in power, how come they didn't pass laws that allowed pharmaceuticals to come in from Canada? And why do Democrats continue to vote against this kind of thing? So the bigger question for me here is not, what can we do to grow the economy? Because the economy, from a numbers perspective, is growing. For me, the bigger question is, how do we start redistributing income to those who are the neediest among us, to those who don't have the same opportunities, to those who are suffering and they don't have a voice in Washington, D.C. And if the Democrats went back to their roots, and for me, going back to the roots of the Democratic Party is how we move the country forward. Because the Democratic Party has established the social security that's allowed this country to thrive in a way that it otherwise couldn't have done. And so therefore, the question for me is not about how to grow, it's about how to grow correctly.
So this is fantastic because we actually do have 5 candidates that all have sort of similar but differing views. And we're sort of all the colors of the rainbow here. I love this. So there is a little bit of agreement on all these things. Certainly there's certain places of regulation that are absolutely absurd that we're rolling back right now, or the administration is. There's other places that could actually be looked at, you know, as simple as the eggs in my fridge. The only reason we have to keep our eggs in our fridge is because of the requirements they go through in this country versus anywhere else in the world. So the point is, getting way off topic, the point is every single one of these questions that we're going to deal with tonight is going to need to be looked at in a really more of a complex way than a yes or no. Trump has unquestionably jump-started the economy in certain ways. But is that because he's done good things, or is that because Wall Street is really excited about what he's going to do to the American worker? And I think the most important thing we can possibly do that is not really on the agenda of anybody in Congress is look at a long-term solution to these issues, particularly the economy. So how do you want to create growth right now? Pass a transportation bill. Pass a massive infrastructure bill. It's the biggest win Trump could have had coming into office, and the biggest win the next president will. How do you want to solve it in the long term? Fix education. The next generation up and coming, one, is being told that the only thing that matters is a college degree, whereas a couple of us went through the tech sector, and 2, that trade schools don't matter. And if you don't fix the education, if you don't teach kids all the skills they actually need to learn, how to balance a budget, how to deal with things in the future, then whether or not we can do well or not do well right now, we're gonna be in collapse 10 years down the road.
Okay, thank you. We've gotten a lot of questions from the audience. Keep them coming. As we filter through them, we're going to be looking for ones that are addressed to all the candidates and ones that are reasonably open-ended. So as you continue to send up candidates questions, keep that in mind. So 7 of them are on campaign finance. No surprise to anybody who's been reading letters to the editor or reports on the campaign. So let's go ahead and get to it at the beginning. So do you think anything needs to be done to fight the influence of money in politics? And if so, what? And I think that goes to Roger
That's
first.
Me? Okay, well, thank you very much for the question. The libertarian position on this is actually quite straightforward. And we actually have 2 sayings that summarize our position. Saying number 1 is, if you want to get the money out of politics, then get the politics out of money. Saying number 2, if the government or if politicians start telling us what can be bought and sold, then I guarantee you the first thing to be bought will be the politicians, right? The point is that you can talk all you want about reforming campaign politics. You can talk all you want about campaign financing. The reality is that a big government is always a corrupt government. That's a basic rule of life. There have been people who have won Nobel Prizes elaborating on this idea. The only solution to getting money out of politics is cutting back the ability of the government to grant favors. Cut out the crony capitalism, end the bailouts, stop the government's ability to interfere in every part of the life, and then the temptation to involve money in politics will disappear. That is the only long-time solution. People have been trying to reform the system for 200 years. It's never worked. And it won't work so long as the government is the sugar daddy handing out favors.
This has been a question that I can remember as long as I've even been interested in politics. Obviously, campaign finances are obviously something that people feel corrupts our politicians as well as our processes. We've passed campaign laws where there's restrictions on how much money can be donated. But the problem is that as long as there's an issue out there that needs to be addressed, regardless if it's business related, social related, or any kind of related, there's always going to be lobbyists out there. There's always going to be big money interests, regardless what the group is. Regardless if the groups are out there that are being created as nonprofit 501c4s, whether they're Democracy for America or, as Joe brought up once, Citizens United, or whatever the group may be, they're out there. They're going to raise money to try to push their agenda, and that's the problem we do have with politics. And that's why it is bad when you actually do have politicians stay in office for a much longer period of time than they actually do. That's why I am in favor of term limits, so that you can only keep that going for so long. And this is actually one of the main reasons why I actually did get involved, because, you know, and this may not be a very popular statement in this room, in this city, but part of the reason why I did get involved was because our current sitting congressman, Jared Polis, is world famous now for being part of the Gang of Four, being part of the Colorado Democracy for America, CODA, and basically buying campaigns, sending money and trying to influence their decisions, and that's what they wanted. And those are the kind of things we need to avoid in politics. We need to make sure you get candidates that care about you and not have some agenda on their back door. You need to make sure you have candidates that aren't going to sit there and go, okay, well, since you threw $1 million in my campaign, I'll do whatever you want me to do. That's what we need in the society. So thanks so much.
So I look at the campaign system, and it's broken on either side of the equation, whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat. Yep. And the folks that are buying the elections are the powerful and the privileged. And people that take campaign donations are going to be subject to the rules of the donations that they get. So let me just lay out one example here. And this is about the system. This is about a broken system. So you have the Holland & Hart law firm, and it's a nice law firm, corporate law firm. And if you look at the donations of this law firm, it gives to Republicans and it gives to Democrats. And that's just the accepted way to play. Now, my fellow Democrat, Joe, has taken donations from that PAC, But this is not about Joe. This is about a system where it's expected that folks that take money like that, that's part of how you play the game. And what I say is, I understand where Roger's coming from, and I understand where Peter's coming from. But for me to say the system is inherently corrupt and we're never going to get above it, I believe is not the right approach. We need to elect people who are willing to say, I'm going to put my service to my country above my service to myself. We need to elect people that say, like the Rotarians would, is this true? We need to ask, is this fair? We need to ask, is it beneficial? And these are the questions that the Rotarians ask. And when we ask these questions, we can take ourselves to be above reproach and say, I'm going to do what's best for my community, and I'm going to do what's best for the people and my country, and I'm not interested in what party tells me, and I'm not interested in what the powerful tell me, and I'm not interested in what the privileged tell me, and I'm going to do what my community, asked me to do. And I'm not going to dial for dollars for my next election. If they don't like it, my constituents can remove me. And that, to me, is how we solve this problem with dignified public servants.
So campaign finance reform is one of the biggest issues that face us. It's one of the biggest tenets of my campaign. This is an issue that both parties are angry with and that neither one will do anything about, period. Neither one has a majority of members who enjoy walking across from their office to that little office to go do call time for 2 to 4 hours a day. But they do it because they're in a system which requires them to give money to be in certain seats or speak on certain committees. It's horrific, and nobody feels like they individually have the ability to get out of it. We haven't had an independent in 40 years in the U.S. House. That's shocking to me, given 42% of this country considers themselves an independent before either major party. This is something an independent could tackle. So a couple quick things. Maine has been able to break away from this. Maine is doing it this November. Colorado could be one of the front runners, and that's something we'll tackle later on, but that's something I completely support. Another thing I actually completely support, I think Peter mentioned this, and I want to be on record saying this too. I completely, in this day and age, support term limits. I think 2 terms for a senator and 5 terms for a House rep is sufficient. I think people need to be in touch with their constituents, with their neighbors and friends, rather than becoming lifelong politicians. It doesn't do any of us any good. And then the third thing is, I had a great discussion with a woman named Tiffany, who's one of the people in charge of End Citizens United. She was at Unrig the System, which is a group of people that are dedicated to this on both sides of the aisle, a little more Democrats than Republicans, but again, everybody cares. And I said, look, blatantly, I agree with End Citizens United. We got to get rid of it. We'll get to that more.
So a couple things I would say, just from the outset, I mean, I respectfully, with much respect, would take some umbrage with some of the comments that were made with respect to, first, Congressman Polis. I just disagree with Peter's comment regarding his record. I think he's had a distinguished record of service to this congressional district, and the notion of him buying elections, I just don't think is borne out by the facts. And with respect to the other comment that was made by Mark in terms of kind of characterizing my record, I guess what I would say is we are very proud of the campaign that we have run. We are proud that the vast majority of people who've donated to our campaign are here in this congressional district and here in our state, and are small dollar donors. And to the extent that we've received some donations from organizations that have also supported progressive Democrats like Keith Ellison and Tulsi Gabbard and Ed Perlmutter and many other people whom I believe have a distinguished record of service to our country. And so I'm proud to be alongside them. Now, that being said, what I would say is that I think that there are a number of systemic obstacles to our ability to function as a democracy, and the influence of money in politics, and dark money in particular, is certainly one of them. I, as Peter referenced, have been kind of beating the drum with respect to overturning Citizens United because I'm a passionate believer that we need to overturn that disastrous court decision. And the organization that Nick Thomas mentioned, End Citizens United, which is focused on that fight, has endorsed only one Democrat in this race, and that's our campaign, because they recognize just how serious of an issue that we take it. Now, that being said, there are also a number of other things we could do in Congress. There's a bill called the Disclose Act, which I think would bring more transparency to the way that money influences our elections. And then in addition, something that I actually think has worked particularly well in the places and the localities where it has been tried, and that's public financing of elections. There are various states that have tried it, various cities in California. That's certainly something I would support at the federal level. So this is something I'm very passionate about and certainly would be a champion for in the Congress.
Please, ladies and gentlemen. What is the role for the United States in the affairs of other countries? Should we be the police of the world, or should we stay out of the affairs of others? What criteria would you use to pick your fights? Peter?
Obviously, this is a very hot topic, and we've already had a couple candidates talk in regards to getting us out of wars. And just so everyone knows, I'm 100% against wars. My grandparents were killed in a bombing from Japan. So I've never even got to meet my grandparents because of the fact that wars they're devastating. And nobody in this room, regardless if you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, or anyone in the room, would ever sit there and say, let's go to war. War is great. However, that being said, we don't live in this picture perfect world where everyone just sits back and we all live in harmony. We have Iran, who wants to take over the complete Middle East. We have Russia, who sees Ukraine and wants to do even more damage. Now has troops in Syria. We have back in the day when we had Barack Obama sit there and say, ISIS is the JV, let's not worry about them. We're not going to do anything. Well, the problem is when you sit back and don't do anything, guess what happens? You actually start creating a vacuum and things actually get worse. And it's not that we want to basically go into war. It's not that we want to send young men and women into the battle, the front lines. But at the same point in time, if your allies are being attacked, you definitely have to be there to support them. The same way we would expect them to support us. If you have terrorists who are out there who have intentions that cause damage, those are where you basically need to make sure you pay your attention to. And the results have been great. I mean, you sit there and think of all the terrorist attack that's been going on, especially in Europe of late. And the fact that now we have got ISIS on the run and we've reclaimed 98% of their territories, and we actually just caught 5 more ISIS high-ranking officials just a couple days ago. That makes our country safer, regardless if you want to believe that or not. And I wish we could all just sit back and never. And I appreciate Mark for going into battle for us. But truth of the matter is that there's countries out there, there's dictators out there who definitely want to cause harm, and we definitely need to make sure we are at the ready to make sure that things don't get worse.
I can't go for that. No can do. So what I would say is, haven't seen the devastation of war and haven't seen how high the stakes get. I appreciate where Peter's coming, but that's a very, very, very simplistic approach to why we're having the problems we're having. To understand the background of ISIS, to understand the background of corrupt regimes where people are overthrowing them because there is no government. I mean, that's a big part of what's going on in the world today. And I'm not saying that we just sit and watch those things unfold, but the importance of soft power and the importance of a strong State Department and the importance of USAID and to lead our foreign policy with our values, not by some cold calculation, Kissinger style, that's done that says the Vietnam War is going to continue because it's a domestic policy issue and therefore we're going to continue dropping bombs on Cambodia and Vietnam. Unfortunately, we have a history of that in this country. And when you see what the stakes are and when you see what's happening globally in the world right now, the approach has to be a much more sophisticated and intelligent approach, which begins with soft power. And it begins in the same kind of way that our revolution began, that is supporting people's rights with a small d democracy. If we begin our foreign policy moving from those kinds of values instead of values that are driven by a military-industrial complex, per Dwight Eisenhower, we will change the world dramatically. People listened to rock and roll. People wore jeans. People saw what was happening in the United States, and it's because we have a beacon in terms of what we can do differently here. And there's a possibility for that. And if we live by that and our foreign policy begins there, that's how we do things differently and not become cops across the country.
So I was raised by two Quaker pacifists from North Boulder. Gilbert White was a godfather. I have always believed that there should, in nearly every single situation, be an alternative to armed conflict. Now, do you disband the military? Absolutely not. But you need to have smart power. That's the point of USGLC. That's the point of the State Department. You need to have the carrot with the stick. And the days of us trying to be an imperialism and the police around the world, it should be over, particularly as we enter the technological age, particularly as borders disappear. We have to find better ways to get along. This is the whole point. This is the point of dealing with the partisanship in our own backyard. So, for starters, if we look at the Middle East today, we are in the situation we're in because of Sykes-Picot and what happened many, many, many years ago between the British and the French in Saudi Arabia and whatnot. But not to get too deep into the policy, every single one of our leaders, for the most part, except for Jimmy Carter, has continued that same idea of let's bomb them into submission. And you cannot win hearts and minds by putting a bullet through a parent of the next generation of those Daesh and ISIL leaders. You cannot do it. So what do we need to do? Well, first of all, and this goes back to the budget itself, you need to figure out why we're putting so much money in the Department of Defense, including right now giving more money to the Department of Defense than was even asked for. Second, you need to listen to generals. A lot of generals out there, watch Fog of War, for instance. A lot of generals believe, my God, we have overstepped in nearly every conflict. And this is a deep issue, but it's absolutely critical, more than anything else. To keep our borders safe, we have to step back.
So I agree with much of what Nick and Mark both described. I mean, I think we are at our best and our strongest when we show strength through diplomacy, when we're working with international organizations and NGOs and the United Nations to help on a global scale with humanitarian needs across the globe, using what I think they both have described as soft power, which in this day and age, in light of the current administration, is in short supply. I would say that relevant to the job that we all are running for, there's a quote by James Madison in the Federalist Papers that I've found to be particularly pertinent, which is he writes that the Constitution supposes what the history of all governments demonstrates, that the executive is the branch most interested in war and most prone to it. That's why ultimately the power to declare war rests with the Congress in Article 1 of our Constitution. The authorization of use of military force, the AUMF, which was authorized back in 2001, has been used over the course of the last 17 years to essentially allow our government to engage in endless wars across the globe in multiple different countries. I believe that needs to be fixed. And actually, I'm proud to have the support of Representative Barbara Lee, the only congresswoman, represents Berkeley, California, who voted against the AUMF back in 2001 and has been fighting for the better part of the last decade and a half to try to rescind and reform the AUMF. So I think when we think about what role can your next congressman play, I think that's an important one.
Well, thank you for that. First off, I'm glad to hear that Joe has actually mentioned the AUMF. As he points out, this is 65 words that were passed in the immediate aftermath of the 9/11 attack, and it has been used to justify wars all around the planet for the last 17 years. Joe it's good that he's mentioned that. It's very good that he's mentioned the fact that Congress should be taking back responsibility for declaring war. That is an act that Congress has completely abdicated. Now, what Joe didn't mention is that it has been a completely bipartisan effort over these last 17 years to pursue wars everywhere on the planet. Now, what I'd like to do is answer the specific question that was asked. The specific question is asked is, where do you draw the line? Where do you think it is worthwhile to intervene militarily, and where do you think it is not? I draw the line at things that directly affect the United States, and I think we have a tangible example of that now. The Middle East, for example, ISIS. I'm sorry, this is a local problem. This has never been an existential threat to the United States. It can never be an existential threat to the United States. Even Iran is something that should be handled by Israel and Saudi Arabia. And believe me, they are perfectly capable of doing it. The fact that we get involved there, all we do is underwrite the irresponsibility of local players for whom this is the real problem. The only thing that we've done in the Middle East is harm our security. The only threat to us from a terrorist perspective, a typical terrorist today goes out and rents a car and drives it into a group of people. All of this is blowback. Conversely, if you want to know a real threat to America's security, it's North Korea. This is something that we have genuinely need to work about. It's something that Gary Johnson alone among the 2016 candidates was pointing out. This is a real discussion. This is a real threat to us. This can affect Seattle. The rest of it is none of our business.
The second most popular category of audience questions has to do with hydrologic fracturing, known as fracking. What is your stance on the practice of fracking in both the 2nd Congressional District and in the nation as a whole? What role should a member of Congress play on that issue? Mark.
Well, thank you. So we need to lead in this district around the question of hydraulic fracturing. Now, there's 2 bills in Congress that are of interest to me. The first is Tulsi Gabbard's Off Fossil Fuels for a Better Future Act. And what that essentially does is say, we're not going to invest in capital infrastructure for the oil and gas industry. It says we're going to retrain workers. It says we're going to stop the subsidies to oil and gas. We currently give $15 billion to extractive industry. 80% of that goes to oil and gas. The other 20% goes to coal. So that's a great place to start. The other one that's of interest to me is Bill 2242, which says it's the Leave It in the Ground Act, which basically says in public lands and off the continental shelves, we don't do any more drilling. Here in this district, we can set the example for what the future of America looks like around this. You can see the harm of hydraulic fracturing, whether you go to Pennsylvania, whether you go to New York, whether you go to West Texas, whether you go to Paonia, Colorado. It brutalizes the land. And just a few folks get the profits from that. And frankly, it also causes, with the methane leaks, it accelerates global warming. That is an existential crisis for us, folks. Here in this district, a safe blue seat, we can lead the way for the country and show this is what it looks like when you accelerate the transition to renewables. This is what it looks like when you draw the line around fracking. This is what it looks like when you say the health of our community is going to take precedence. That's what's important about this district. I'm the only Democrat here who's supporting the 2,500-foot setback. I'm the only Democrat who's supporting the Off Fossil Fuels for a Better Future Act. And I'm the only Democrat who's saying, as we should in this most progressive of districts, that it's time to ban fracking. Not if, not when, but now.
For those of you who are not aware, this is going to be the question of 2018's election. Not just CD2, but across the state, particularly in this state of Colorado. We are an energy-rich state, and we have some strong opinions on this. Ironically, there's 2 things that go into this that are never talked about. One, when we say fracking is about environmentalists versus non-environmentalists, if you will, or people who 200,000 plus jobs that rely on the hydrocarbon industry, we are not also taking into account with these setbacks that houses being built by developers on many of these areas are built on previous energy rights, and the new people coming in to join us in our community are not told about where drilling can occur. So if you want to talk about issues to solve tomorrow, that needs to happen. The second quick thing is I sat down with an energy guy quite a while ago, and the most amazing thing happened. He started out with saying the biggest issue with fracking today is that nobody is making us fall within the regulations. It's an energy guy who told me this. And we need more regulations on a lot of that. So if you agree with fracking, and I assume most people in this room do not, you have to start with at least enforcing the regulations and creating new ones. But the second thing is that we don't talk about, fracking is incredibly unhealthy. So answer the question before I run out of time. We need to get rid of fracking, period. But we need to find a way to do that. And the other issue that is not talked about is not just what it's doing in certain areas to groundwater when we frack too close to reservoirs, when we frack too close to people's homes, but it's also the air quality. My sister, who teaches at CSU, pointed this out to me the other day. The air in Boulder is far worse than you might think, and that is terrifying. Look into that one.
So, like many folks in this room, I come at this issue from, of course, a personal point of view, living in Lafayette. And my wife and I think about this quite a bit, thinking about the community that we will raise our daughter in, and the groundwater and the air that she ultimately will be breathing. I believe that there are a number of things that we can do both at the state and the federal level to combat hydraulic fracturing in our communities. First and foremost, I'm a strong proponent of local control and the ability of communities to be able to regulate and ban the practice, as many communities in our state have tried to do, including the city that I live in and that my family lives in. In addition, I believe that we should have a codification of the Martinez decision, which is a decision in which the Court of Appeals of our state ruled the oil and gas regulatory body in our state had essentially abdicated its authority and its ability to regulate oil and gas and put health and safety of our citizens above any other interest. I think that is a no-brainer. It should be intuitive, and it's something that ultimately the legislature should codify. It's why I'm proud to have the support of people like Mike Foote and Matt Jones, folks who have been running bills year after year in our state legislature to try to ultimately better regulate and combat this practice. At the federal level, I support one of the bills that Mark mentioned, the Keep It in the Ground Act, Tulsi Gabbard's federal bill, which would effectively ban fracking on all federal public lands in the United States. That's something I was proud to come out for many months ago, because again, I think it's an example of a way in which Congress can lead on this issue to protect our communities and ultimately the places that we live and the public lands that we are very lucky to live alongside of and enjoy.
Thank you. Well, I think there's few issues about which there is more misinformation than this particular issue. You know, I should say as well that I have lived in Europe for I've lived in Europe for a long period of time. One of the countries, the first bit of misinformation is the idea that we are on the verge of any type of ability to transition to alternative energy in a short period of time is complete nonsense. Anybody who says that to you is lying. You know, anybody who believes that hasn't looked at the numbers. The fundamental problem with all forms of alternative energy is intermittency, right? When the sun doesn't shine, when the wind doesn't blow, we have a problem, right? If you take a look at Germany, Germany has one of the most aggressive alternative energy programs in the world right now. You know what German carbon dioxide emissions have done over the last few years? They have gone up. And the reason they've gone up is because when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, they burn coal to make up the difference. In America, our emissions of carbon dioxide have actually been falling steadily over the last few years. And the reason for that is because we are getting rid of coal and we're replacing it with natural gas, and the natural gas comes from fracking. So you cannot sit here and pretend that you care about the environment, that you care about global warming, that you care about climate change, and be against fracking. It is completely inconsistent. Right? That's point number one. The other thing is that fracking, again, there's a huge amount of information about the damage that's done. This is straightforward, though. If they are doing damage, then just like any other form of pollution, if someone comes onto my property and pollutes on my property, there's a simple solution. They get sued. That's, there's no problem with pollution on my property. And that's what we should do. This is a question of property rights and people enforcing their property rights. And I agree with you that things like, for example, forced pooling should disappear, but fracking in general has been an enormous boon to our country and to this state.
All right, this question is the number one reason why I'm here tonight. As a person who's worked many years in renewable solar energy and still does to this day, I've had a hand in putting more solar on more homes in Colorado than anyone in the state. That's the truth. I have extensive knowledge of this environment as well as the energy environment. And truth of the matter is, as much as I love solar and love renewable energies, is the same reason why I love fracking. And that's because when I walk outside this building, the same reason why I'm fracking is the same reason why there's hardly any homes around here with solar panels on your home. And that's because you guys can't afford it. I know you guys want to sit there and say we can, but you know what? We went through an energy crisis 15 years ago. We were in such bad shape that our government, Democrats, Republicans, were actually looking into hydrogen energy because we were such a slack. And the problem is, you guys are spoiled. We're all spoiled. You guys forgot when gasoline was $5, $6, $7 a gallon. You forgot when your electric bills was $400 or $500 a month. Who in this room right now remembers paying $80 to fill up your gas tank? What is it today? Exactly. Who wants to basically go back to having your electric bills being $300, $400 a month? And the reason why you guys don't have that anymore is because fracking has exploded and natural gas has become our number one resource for energy. That's a fact. And the thing about this is everyone sits there and say, well, solar and wind are so valuable. Well, solar is actually only 1% of our total electrical output in this country. 1%. Wind, 7% at max. People sit there and say, Pete, don't you care about our environment? I absolutely do. Well, the funny thing about this, natural gas burns 60% cleaner has done more for our environment than solar and wind combined. Yeah, I sit there and say, you care about the health? I do, absolutely do. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment has done a full testing and found out that outside the 500 setback, no violations whatsoever, no elevated toxins. The National Cancer Institute and the CDC has found out that out of the 9 counties that make up the greater Denver metro area, Weld County, which holds 90% of the wells, the lowest rate of cancer, even lower than Boulder County. Thank you.
School shootings are nothing new in this country. There have been school shootings documented as far back as the late 1800s. In the 1980s, there were 50 deaths resulting from such shootings. In the 1990s, there were 89. In the decade beginning in the year 2000, there were 107 attributable deaths to gun violence in schools. Since 2010, that number stands at 163. In light of this increase, how would you propose to keep our children safe in schools? And Nick, you go first.
Thank you. I want to start by mentioning that Mark and I will be 2 candidates with both of our Attorney General candidates, Mike and Mike, at Doherty and Foote at a event next Sunday at 2 p.m. I actually forget the location, but I think there's info out there. And it will be 2.5 hours on, I believe, this question, which is lucky because 2 minutes is not enough. This is an incredibly complex question because, first of all, again, raised by pacifists, I have parents who believe that you shouldn't have a gun, period. They shouldn't exist. And I have an uncle in Arvada who used to hold NRA meetings in the basement. So I grew up with seeing both sides. My twin brother and I are hunters. We never had guns in our parents' house out of respect, but we both own shotguns. We both go hunting, particularly bird hunting. We also both feel that having large assault-style rifles, and by the way, this is the wrong terminology for it, but large weapons that can basically create mass destruction are absolutely unnecessary and unconscionable in a society that wants to function. However, per your question, and what we'll get into next week, which I hope a lot of you join me for, it is not only the guns. We need to deal with that. We need to deal with mental health. But as Andrew Romanoff would say, it's not just the mental health. It's also what's happened in our society, the basic respect, the basic understanding of how we function together. What you see in the video games, I know that's a joke to some people in that conversation, but I was just out at the Martin Luther King Center where I go every January to help out with Martin Luther King events, and there's this kid sitting next to me playing this game on his cell phone that is so much worse than anything I ever played on the Super Nintendo, which was so much worse than my mom thought should exist. We have a lot of issues that need to go into tackling this one problem.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up here in Colorado. I went to public schools down south in Littleton and Douglas County. And I can remember when I was 14 years old having my high school be shut down. And, kind of alarmed with other students wondering why that was. And then we were all sent home. And I learned later that evening, as my parents were home and were watching the news, that the reason our school was shut down was because 9 miles away, the Columbine tragedy was happening. And you watch the screens as you see the pictures of young folks no older than me who wouldn't get to live their dreams because they were so tragically cut down by gun violence. And I was thinking about this, I've thought about it quite a bit. I turned 34 yesterday, and I think about the 20 years between that incident and today, and the lack of any political will on the part of Congress to do anything about it. I am a firm believer in gun violence prevention. I believe we need an assault weapons ban. I believe we need universal background checks and closing the gun show loophole. I believe we need to ultimately repeal the Dickey Amendment, which has effectively precluded the Center for Disease and Control from studying this issue over the course of the last 20 years. There is so much that we could do at the federal level, but we need people in Congress who are willing to take on that fight, and that is something I am proud to do because I've done it. As a regent here in this district, in our community, I fought against concealed weapons on our campuses here in Boulder and across the CU system. It is something I am passionate about and will be a leader on if I'm lucky enough to be elected to be your next congressman.
Well, as Nick was pointing out, this is an incredibly complex issue that cannot be dealt with in a 2-minute response. What I would say is just a few general statements. Number one is we are where we are, right? And where we are is that we have a country where we have an enormous amount of weapons. We have an enormous amount of assault weapons, right? And that's not going to go away. So the idea that we're going to make this thing suddenly disappear overnight is just something that's just not going to happen. Even in the countries that have tried to do this, Australia, for example, the actual participation has been minute. So that's point number one. We are where we are. Point number two, as I said before, the right to self-defense is the most fundamental right of all. And the right to self-defense is the basis of all other rights. We must preserve the right to self-defense because the idea that the police are going to be there to protect you in all circumstances is just impossible. Now, that said, I would be in favor. One of the problems that we have with our schools is that they are a very soft target. These guys are able to walk in, they're able to take their time, they're able to shoot at will for an extended period of time. I would be in favor, but I should point out as well that this is not a federal issue, this is a state issue. I would be in favor of making schools harder targets. Do we need more police there? Then let's do it. This is small money compared to the overall impact that it would have on our communities. The other thing is that if we could come up with a red flag law that actually makes sense, that preserves due process, which actually targets the appropriate people, I think that that's something that we should be looking at seriously. I am not willing to compromise the ability of people to defend themselves. But on the other hand, there are circumstances where I think that we can take greater control and we can protect our children in schools.
This is an interesting topic, obviously, and the 2 minutes doesn't do it for us in regards to what we need to say up here. I can sit up here and run off 1,000 FBI statistics telling you exactly why guns are safe, but that's not what you want to hear. What you do want to hear is that we're going to be safe. And when we go outside, no one's going to shoot us and no one's going to harm us, that our children, when they're in school, they're going to be okay. And that's what you all want. And that's what I want. And that's part of the reason why I'm such a supporter of the Second Amendment. Things that we talk about, that we don't hear. We do hear everything, obviously, when something's publicized and something bad does happen. They are bad. But Barack Obama conducted a study through the Center for Disease Control and found out that 500 to 3 million people a year are able to protect themselves from rape, theft, or murder because they were able to arm themselves. And we sit there and say, guns, you can't just not do something about guns. Well, you know what? I am all for making sure people are safe. But the problem is what no one will actually realize and accept is that there's never been a single gun law or crime bill that's ever been created that actually prevented crime. In 1994, we created the assault rifle ban, and guess what happens? We still have the Columbine shooting, one of the most famous school shootings ever. And the worst thing about that was guns wasn't even their main source of anger. They actually set 2 bombs off to explode in the school and kill 500 students. That's what people don't realize. That, you know what? We can sit here and talk all day long about guns and the dangers of them. We keep ignoring the actual problem. And that is basically mental health. If we continue to ignore mental health, you're never going to get anywhere with this situation. You're still going to have someone creating 6 pipe bombs in Austin and having the whole city on fear. You're going to have someone in Toronto getting in the car and running over 10 people. You're going to have other shootings going on regardless of the situation, or even be like England, who's gotten so bad now that they have to basically outlaw knives. And like as what Mark said here a second ago, even Australia, who everyone loves to use as an example, they had a mass shooting just Saturday night, killing 7 people. It's something that we need to understand. Mental health is where we need to focus on. Thank you.
So I appreciate the discourse. Let me just say I'm in favor of banning assault weapons, and I'm in favor of the red flag. And I'm also not in favor of expanding concealed carry laws like they're trying to do in Congress. I would just say one small correction is the Dickey Amendment did get removed. It can actually do research now at the CDC based on the last budget that was passed. But I want to actually go upstream a little bit and follow the money. 80% of Americans think that loopholes need to be closed. 80% of Americans think that gun violence needs to be addressed. So the political will is actually there. So how come nothing's changed? You know, so unfortunately, it goes back to follow the money. And the money is the NRA, right? The money is the NRA spreading its dollars around so that folks get reelected. And they have a lot of political will, and they get their way irrespective of what ordinary folks want. And then, you know, you dig deeper and you start going, well, how about high capacity magazines? Well, that law firm that I was talking about, Holland and Hart, lobbied against the high capacity magazine signature of Hickenlooper. And again, they give money to Democrats and Republicans. And so my concern is that we want change as a people. This is a value of ours for our children to be able to go to school safely. I shouldn't take my high school daughter to Boulder High, and as an ex-military guy, I walk her around the school and I go, here's your exits, here's where you take cover. If you're on the first floor, you go here. If on the second floor, you go there. That's what I did as a responsible father. But when I look at the problem, it's not about us. It's not about families and communities, because we know what we want. It's about the politicians being responsive to our needs. And as long as the money is there, the change is not going to happen.
We have 3 almost identical questions on the subject of climate change. Do you accept the science that humans contribute to climate change? How should the federal government tackle this problem? And Joe, that's you.
So the answer is yes, and I think that there's a lot that the federal government could do to tackle this problem. When I first announced my campaign a year ago, I was asked by a reporter what sort of the biggest issue in my mind that I would kind of stake my campaign on, and if I was elected to Congress, my tenure. And to me, it was climate change. I do believe it is an existential threat. And I say that as a 34-year-old thinking about the world that my daughter will inherit. Right. And so from my perspective, I think there is a lot that we could do at the federal level to dramatically reduce our carbon emissions. I think from the vantage point of a carbon tax or pricing carbon, my point of view is that that's something that we should do at the federal level to dramatically reduce our carbon emissions. In addition, I think we should repeal the phase down of the renewable energy credits. So the investment production credit both for wind and solar. There's a bill pending right now by Senator Wyden out of Oregon that would repeal that phase down. I think that's something that we should support. I disagree, again, respectfully, with Peter and Roger and some of their comments earlier with respect to the question around fracking and the environment. There's an author named Tony Seba who's actually spoken here in Boulder before. Some of you may be familiar with him, and he has a great quote, which is that human civilization didn't exit the Stone Age because we ran out of rocks. right? I mean, we ultimately entered the Bronze Age because of disruptive technologies. And you see that right now in the renewable energy sector. For the first time last year, renewable energy on a utility grid scale exceeded nuclear power here in the United States. So I believe there's actually a lot that we can do at the federal level if we would level the playing field and eliminate the massive subsidies that are rife in our tax code for oil and gas and tangible drilling and the like. I think you remove those. I think you support renewable energy, and ultimately, I think we can really begin to start to tackle this problem.
Well, a couple things. First off, the first thing I'd say is that just again to answer the question directly, do you accept the science? The reality is that nobody on this podium knows what the science is. That is the reality. All right. The reality is that, and I can tell you again, you laugh at it. Don't laugh yet, because I'm actually going to come to the same conclusion that you want, but I'm going to get there in a different way. The reality is the science is extremely complicated. I can tell you that it is far from settled, and certainly the politicians. You saw them talking to Mark Zuckerberg. They are certainly not smart enough to figure it out. Right? But the answer is we don't need to know whether the science is true or not in order to make a decision, because we insure ourselves all the time, and we can make decisions even in the absence of knowing what the science says. Therefore, I am in favor on the basis of a precautionary principle, because the problem is that if we make the wrong decision here, we can make wrong decisions in one of two ways. If we make the wrong decision here, and if we do nothing about global warming, and it turns out that the science, at least as some people think, is right, we could have a major catastrophe on our hand. Therefore, I think that we should insure against that. And the way that I want to insure against that is through a carbon tax. And that, by the way, is a deviation from most libertarians, I'm sure you can imagine. I want to do it as a carbon tax, but I want to do that only as a carbon tax, on the condition that the carbon tax results in a reduction in other taxes, so it isn't a net increase in taxes. And number one, and it is also eliminating all the other rules, regulations, subsidies, and believe me, the alternative energies get massively more subsidies than any other form of energy. Let's eliminate all the other alternatives, replace it with a carbon tax, and then let the free market take us from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age.
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know if humans contribute to global warming. I really don't. I'm not educated enough. I can go and find 1,000 people out there, scientists who sit there and say that humans are the cause. I could find another 1,000 that say absolutely not. Joe quoted a person that basically stated that, hey, guess what? I can name off the creator of the Weather Channel is 100% against that. And am I saying I believe him? But what I'm going to say is this. We've had 2 ice ages before, and guess what? It wasn't any humans that made the world warm up. I don't know if that's truly the case or not, but what I'm going to tell you this is I'm all for reducing the CO2 emissions in this country. Absolutely, 100% around this world. And once again, if you guys are going to sit there and just completely believe that renewable energy is the way to go, I'm going to ask you how. It's 1% of our total output right now. Wind is still 7%, and the only reason why we're above nuclear is because we throw water in there as well. 15% of our energy comes from those facilities. You get rid of fracking, you get rid of oil, you get rid of gas. Well, guess what? Everyone in this room, you might as well start looking for a new home because you won't be able to afford your electric bills. If you guys don't see the benefits of natural gas, which has done more for our environment than anything else, natural gas has basically allowed us to have our carbon emissions reduced by 14% in the last 10 years. Methane emissions have been going down by 19% since the 90s. These are facts. And if you want to sit there and give the credit to renewable energies, I don't know how 1% solar energy or 6% wind is the reason for that. Fossil fuels is right now a stepping stone. The thing that we want to do is make sure that you guys can survive on a daily basis, but also at the same point in time, work on our environment, regardless if it is human interaction or not. That's what my goal is for you. Thank you.
So I'm pretty sure you're not going to find 1,000 scientists that disagree with climate in this town anyway. And I think probably, I don't know, a good percentage of the climate scientists in the world probably are within this second district here. So It's a simple answer, yes, of course, to the climate science. What else needs to be said? So then the next question for me then becomes, what stance are we taking here in the 2nd District? And again, the 2nd District is one of the most progressive districts in the country. And so we need to lead the way here. And, having been in the technology industry for the last 15 or 20 years, and having been at the forefront of a lot of thinking around these kinds of topics, for me, the question isn't, well, are we going to get there? It's how do we accelerate to that point? And so we need to be looking 50 years down the road and going, this is what the future looks like. And we back into how we're accelerating out of our current place. It's not whether we accelerate. It's not if we accelerate. It's how much can we put the pedal to the metal. And this, my friends, is where government regulation comes in really handy, because it helps put the pedal to the metal in that kind of way. And so as I look at the future, and as I look at the possibilities, and as I share the same concerns of the folks that are sitting here at the table, to me, in this district, we take the combined activism of the grassroots folks who say, let's leave oil and gas. Then we take the capacity of private industry and public community partnerships to start investing differently. And then we bring in all the PhDs here. We can do something really phenomenal in this district. And we show our country how to move things forward. And on top of that, we define what the coming industry in renewables is. And we make this district the leader, not just in the country, but in the world for what renewables looks like.
I like that, what Mark said, put the pedal to the metal. That's absolutely necessary in this situation more than about any other one. There are a lot of industries that it would be better for government to step out of the way and allow private industry to step in and move us forward. This is not one of them. We need to, well, and actually some industries do that. I'm a big fan, these guys here, Tesla and Elon Musk, who is based out of Boulder a long time ago and has done amazing things pushing us forward outside of what the government has tried to fight him on. So I want to touch on one cartoon that I love. I love. There's this picture of a bunch of scientists sitting in a room, and one of them turns to the other one and said, but what if we're wrong and we do all this work to make the environment better for nothing? I mean, this should be intuitive. And it's not just about solar and wind. This was talked about earlier. It's batteries help this. We don't need natural gas when the wind slows down and it's nighttime. You put in battery systems and we have the ability to do this. There's so many options right now, but it is something that we have to tackle immediately. It is critical. And if we move forward on it, if we progress on it, for instance, fixing our transportation issues, I didn't get into this enough earlier, but in the 6 months I lived in China for my MBA, 52 new bullet train routes were opened. Right now, how many do we have in the United States? 0. There are so many ways we can move us forward and away from some of the big things that use the hydrocarbons that are hurting us. Amory Lovins, he's in Aspen, but he's nearly in our district. He talks about how we need to just be efficient on our houses. That's something everybody can agree on. Anyway, this is a simple, common sense issue. Scientists agree on this, 99 out of 100. This is something that has to be dealt with.
Gentlemen, what action do you think Congress should take in regards to both legal and illegal immigration? And specifically, if you would all please state your position on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, also known as DACA, and the proposed border wall. And Roger, you're up.
Sure, thank you. Well, why don't we start with the border wall first? This is one of the dumbest ideas anybody has ever heard of. In particular, look at that. Now, those are some hands. In particular, the idea that this is going to stop the flow of drugs into our country. I want, it's like you can go into any prison in this country and get all the drugs you want. All right. And I assure you, they have very big walls there. They have guards, etc. The idea that this is going to affect anything on the drug is complete insanity. So that's the answer on the border wall. The position on immigration, as you know, the Libertarian Party has traditionally been very pro-immigration, right? I am not an open borders person, but I believe in very easy immigration. In particular, I believe that with things like the H-1B visa, which the current administration claims that all they care about is illegal immigration, that's nonsense. They have done everything possible to restrict legal immigration as well. We should be welcoming the type of workers who come in here on H-1B visas, the type of people who come in here, get educated, some of the smartest, most talented people in the world. Do you know that the heads of AI at Google, Microsoft, and Facebook are all immigrants? We should be welcoming these people with open arms. The entire world is competing for these talented individuals. We are training them. 70% of our computer scientists who are pursuing advanced degrees are foreigners, and then we are chasing them from the country. This is insanity. At the other end of the spectrum, I think that we need a robust guest worker program for unskilled workers so that unskilled workers can come into this country, do the type of work. It should be coordinated with local companies. It should be coordinated with local communities who actually need these people. As you know, we have worker shortages throughout the entire country. And then if they're in this country for an extended period of time, if they've taken the steps to become a U.S. citizen, they should also be allowed to become U.S. citizens. On DACA, the answer is let them stay. They are U.S. citizens. They are our neighbors.
I'm going to address the DACA question first because that's a much easier question. And I actually do support basically making sure we do provide a pathway for DACA recipients to be able to stay in our country. Not give them amnesty so much, but more so basically giving them a path where they can work and prove that they do deserve to be in this country. That's pretty much where we need to go with that one. In regards to illegal immigration, I'm going to quote, President Barack Obama, President Bill Clinton, our current Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, in that to quote them and paraphrase them is that illegal immigration is wrong. That's exactly what they said. They also have said basically that their presence it deflates our income levels. It basically hurts our job markets. It is unfair to those who legally come here, which I legally came here. It is not fair to those who apply and want to come to this country the right way for them to be circumvented because of the fact that someone just basically jumped the wall. Now, when we're talking about the wall, you look at the cities down the border, along the border towns, the towns that actually do have border walls. Well, statistics come back saying that it's detoured by 90%. You know what? It's one of these things where you get to sit there and say, immigration, we definitely do want people to be able to come here and enjoy the American dream the same way I did, and the same way my family did, and the same way everyone did. However, there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And I believe basically making sure that we do have secure borders and also making sure that our country is safe. We always talk about people coming here for a better life, but we don't talk about the 60,000 people who died from drug overdoses. We don't talk about the 20,000 people, 40% of which are children, that are brought here for human prostitution. Those are things we don't talk about, and those are things that we do need to control in regards to making sure our country is safe, as well as making sure that we do have immigration reform. Thank you.
Bueno, pues, la lucha continúa, which means the fight continues against this kind of xenophobic, narrow, really, frankly, un-American thinking. The fact of the matter is there's a human face to this. My libertarian friend and I are going to disagree on a lot of things, but on this I agree wholeheartedly. DACA, we've made agreements and we need to honor those agreements, and those folks are Americans. And then we do need a immigration reform altogether, and both sides of the aisle need to come together to do that. And we need to make it responsive to the 21st century. But let me put a human face on this. My mother lives in El Paso, Texas, and she's been there for 20-some years now. She helped found a women's community center that would help train undocumented women in English skills and then in job skills. And she's been at the forefront of a lot of the protests around, frankly, some of the refugee camps that have been established by both the Obama administration and the current administration. She's seen children be taken away from their mothers, separated, and not be brought back together. She's seen and helped folks where they know that they're going to be facing an immigration court and they can't speak a lick of English and they get 90 seconds in front of a judge. She's been there with the nuns that are fighting shoulder to shoulder with her when 3-year-old children are sitting in front of a judge having to talk about why they deserve to immigrate. So, our values as Americans, when we see what's happening in the country south of there, when we see people fleeing those places, those devastated countries, because you have a choice between your son and daughter being taken by a criminal gang or you go to America, I tell you what I do, folks. I grab my family and I hop on the bus and the train and I make my way north, because that is the beacon for all those folks down there, and I would do the same.
How wonderful it is, and Joe, I apologize, I'm going to put words in your mouth. How wonderful it is that we finally found one issue that all 5 of us will agree on. DACA, we all agree on. It's absurd what the administration is talking about right now. We need to completely reassess their assumption on it. So that aside, the wall is really terrible. It's sad that, that you need to put up walls. Sometimes it's necessary, but oftentimes it's sad. This one's not necessary. Here's why I would disagree with you, Peter, while talking about basically the same issue. If there's an immigration problem of illegal versus legal immigration, the place to put all that money that it would cost to put this massive wall down the border, even if it holds out 90% of a certain town, you have to do it the whole way. That money needs to go into fundamentally fixing a lot of the things that lead to our illegal immigration issues. We have, for instance, created a great deal of the unrest in northern Mexico due to our need for drugs in this country and our need to bring back and forth weapons. They're much tighter on weapons. We do this sort of trade, and we put so much money into it from our side that it's destabilized these massive portions of northern Mexico. And do I want to live in a town with a couple little kids where gangs are basically going after each other using American-funded dollars? No. I'm going to sneak across too. The irony of immigration itself, though, is we're still not dealing with the root cause, and instead we just flip-flop back and forth. If you look at great YouTube videos from back in the day, you'll see George W. Bush and Reagan arguing over who's more pro-immigration. And we know that Obama probably sent more people back than the last few presidents. So who's right, who's wrong? Neither party's right. But immigration needs to be dealt with so that we don't have the influx of illegal immigration and we take care of those who are already here.
So Nick's right. I mean, this is an issue that I think we all generally agree on. I certainly oppose the border wall and support DACA and support a Clean Dream Act. And it's an issue that, like other folks have described, is certainly personal to me. It's in many ways what compelled me to run last summer, thinking a lot about how this president has demonized immigrants and immigrant communities in our country, and thinking quite a bit about how different my life would have been had my parents tried to immigrate to the United States today with this president in the White House instead of 35 years ago. In January, when my wife and I, when we found out that we were having our first child, we didn't know it was a girl then, but we went and got the first ultrasound and got to hear her heartbeat for the first time, which of course is a moment that just brings certainly brought both of us to tears. That same day in January, later that day, I read the president's comments in which he used some of the most offensive language one could imagine to describe the entire continent that my parents hail from, the place where my last name hails from and where my daughter's name will hail from. And so from my vantage point, the xenophobia is real. And I think we collectively have to work to combat it. I think we need to return to a compassionate immigration policy that is reflective of our best values as Americans. Right? To me, that is what this debate really is all about. It's something that I am passionate about for personal, obvious reasons, but it's also something that's been a current and a fabric of my activism in public service. As a regent, I led the way for a resolution that ultimately convinced a Republican colleague to support undocumented students receiving in-state tuition here in our state, because these students are our neighbors, they are our coworkers, they are our friends, and they have great, great promise. And I think a lot about the students that I've met over the course of this campaign. One gentleman in Fort Collins at CSU, a biochem student who has to worry every day about whether or not he will be deported from the only country he's ever known as home. It matters, and it's certainly something I will fight for in Congress.
So Kit and I are watching our time here, and we'd like to squeeze in 2 questions before your closing statements. In order to do that, we're going to suspend our rules and ask you a 30-second question. So got that, Joffrey? 30 seconds on this one. Do you support national legalization of cannabis?
That would be my turn to answer this question on a 30-second split. I have very mixed feelings in regards to marijuana. I've seen the horrible effects it's had on certain people. When I see statistics on Channel 4 News stating that, Colorado accidents have increased by 48% from cannabis usage, that scares me. When I hear basically that, was that 30 seconds? Okay. Basically, that's something that I would need to look at further.
So yes, and let me also state that, Colorado has led the way in this for the last however many years, and we are the national leaders in this. So what needs to happen next is we here in Colorado need to be not just legalizing cannabis, but also making the capacity to do business by having federal legislations which allows folks in the cannabis industry to do banking. That way we get any kind of corruption out of it, we make it a legal industry, and we just remove the crime altogether, which is what this needs to happen here.
It's always nice to hear issues that actually pertain to us rather than local candidates. Yes, absolutely. I don't smoke it. I never have gotten to because I wanted to work in federal jobs and I've never needed it either. But I absolutely agree that it should be legalized. It's far less harmful than alcohol. I don't think it's a gateway drug, and I think a lot of the science shows that. What I will say is be careful. It's step by step. And this is, at the moment, supported bipartisan, although we saw Hickenlooper's comments the other day. But this is something that we should be proud of as Coloradans for leading the way on.
Short answer, yes. I support full legalization of cannabis at the federal level. I'd support it here in our state. There's a bill at the federal level called the Marijuana Justice Act that would do precisely that. Senator Booker has introduced it, and it's got a lot of momentum, and that's something I'd be proud to co-sponsor or elected. In addition, I think there are a number of different things that we could do iteratively with respect to marijuana banking. Is a great example. Congressman Perlmutter has worked actually quite hard on that bill in particular to try to provide banking solutions to the marijuana industry so that we can ensure that the criminal element is rooted out. And then finally, I will just say our congressman here in the 2nd District co-founded the Cannabis Caucus in the United States Congress. So it certainly has been a leader on this issue and something that I would continue to support.
Well, as a libertarian, you can imagine this doesn't take me very long to say yes. But what I would emphasize is that this is another classic case where, frankly, this is a decision that should be made at the state level. We need to legalize it at the federal level so that we don't have these various things, banking, et cetera, people have talked about it, that affect. This should be a state decision. We shouldn't have federal regulations which are affecting the ability of the industry. But it's very simple. Just remove cannabis from Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, period, done. You don't have to talk about any other legislation, just remove it.
Okay, we got one more. Excuse me, Mark.
Oh, I thought we're just getting ready to get the next question. Yeah,
okay.
Is this 30 seconds also?
No, we'll be back to 2 minutes here, and hopefully they might. There are actually 4 very closely related questions, and I'll let you choose which portions of them you answer. How do you view the job of being a member of Congress? What specific skills and experience do you bring to the job? What makes you more ready than the other candidates? And how would your agenda be different from that of Jared Polis?
So for me, I guess the experience that I bring is being in this community for 20-some years, raising my family here, my daughters, and then from a business perspective, being in the startup community and being a leader in innovation. I was doing artificial intelligence and big data in the mid-2000s before it was a household word. I was a leader in the mindfulness revolution in terms of bringing mindfulness out of places like Boulder and taking them to SWAT teams, special operators, and fighter pilots, and showing them that managing their minds is actually super helpful, not only from their performance at work, but also at home. So, having played in a bunch of different worlds and having grown up overseas and having served in the military, I feel like I can speak to a lot of different folks from a lot of different backgrounds about a lot of different things. And to me, the capacity to do that is important in this district because I'm a grassroots candidate. And I want to be able to reach out to folks and say, let's talk about these very human problems. And let's talk about them in this context of solutions. And let's talk about them in the context of what does it matter to people? And how do we get these things done by bringing folks together? And so, one of my big focuses is about leading by convening. And that means that when we're tackling problems, we're not tackling problems for 5 years from now. We're tackling problems looking 50 years from now. I know the economic and technological disruption that's coming. And what I want to do is bring folks to the table, bring the grassroots to the table, bring the minds to the table, and start solving those problems by bringing a leadership style that's not just about getting things done, but it's about, again, moving with the creativity of the mind, the courage of the gut, and the compassion of the heart. And that's how I want to lead this district. And to me, that's how this district needs to be led and deserves.
So this is a great question for me. It feels like a softball. I'll tell you, for starters, in this district, there's 133,000 registered Republicans. There's a few thousand registered Libertarians, 172,000 registered Democrats, and 200,000 registered unaffiliated independents. So I know Mark and Joe both feel like they're going to need to split my vote in order to win, and I understand that, but we'll argue over that after June. There has not been an independent in Congress in 40 years. Besides Bernie Sanders, and bless his heart, he's not an independent who reaches across the aisle. We need somebody who brings back the ability to listen, respect, and speak to all members of Congress in order to try to pass meaningful legislation that brings everyone to the table. Now, I have sat with the furthest left current representatives. I have sat with the current most right representatives. In fact, I saw Ted Cruz and Steve King just a couple weeks ago. I am able to talk with everyone, and I have developed rapport with all of these men, sadly, mainly men, but also some women. I was with Tulsi Gabbard actually down in New Orleans a few weeks ago, and she came out here as well. I have had the ability for years to work with people from both different sides, or all the sides, simply because I was raised, again, by Quaker pacifists, and then an uncle who's a Mormon bishop. I've had this experience of bringing the sides together, which is exactly what we need right now in this tumultuous, partisan, tribal atmosphere we're living in. And now, with respect to these three guys, if a Democrat or a Republican enters Congress today, they will enter with zero seniority and zero strong ability to represent CD2 out of the gate. But imagine an independent going down to Congress where you have an issue come up like healthcare or anything else, and you say, the Democrats voted as a block this way, the Republicans voted as a block this way, and the independent from Colorado voted this way.
So the job of a congressperson is very much a multifaceted job. You have to be an advocate for the nearly 1 million people that you represent across the 10 counties here in the 2nd Congressional District. Have to be a representative to accurately reflect the views of those folks and the constituents that you serve. But it also is fundamentally about being a legislator, which speaks to an issue that I actually have been particularly concerned about in the age of Trump, which is, there's a lot of discussion and bemoaning of so-called career politicians and people who have worked in government. And we see the results, right? We see a president that has never run for public office before, that has never served in elected or appointed office, that knows nothing of legislation, that has filled his cabinet with a Secretary of Education that knows nothing about education policy. I am deeply concerned about having a Congress where the people who are ultimately serving are folks who have a demonstrated record of being able to build coalitions to enact legislation that promotes the public welfare. That is the job. That is the ultimate duty of our Congress in the Constitution, if you look to Article 1. And from my vantage point, I have been very lucky. It's an odd set of circumstances in which, as the 34-year-old on the stage, I have more government experience than any other person on this stage, having served as a regent for 6 years, serving on a Republican majority board, but ultimately being able to get a lot done for the people of this district over the course of 6 years, convincing and cajoling and persuading my colleagues to join me in enacting real change that would better our community. As a leader in the state cabinet, running our state's Consumer Protection Agency, managing a department of 600 civil servants dedicated to protecting the public and our civil rights. To me, that experience matters, and it's something that would certainly would help me, I think, in being an effective member of Congress if I'm fortunate enough to get this job.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Look, I think there's three things in particular that I would like to, or one thing in particular I'd like to emphasize, which is there's three bedrock principles to our Constitution. And those three bedrock principles are individual rights, a separation of powers, and a devolution of government power to the lowest level possible. And I think bringing back all three of those things are the most important thing that anybody can do in Congress. And ironically, Donald Trump is actually reminding everybody that maybe we don't want to have a single person, an imperial president, who is determining everything in this country. And if that's the only thing that Donald Trump's presidency does, that'll be a pretty good thing. So as a congressman, I will defend individual rights. I will insist upon a separation of powers. For example, we talked about the AUMF before. Congress has abdicated its authority to the presidency over the last 30 or 40 years. We need to take it back. The intention was that there's a separation of powers, and within the different forms of government, Congress is the preeminent branch of government, and we need to take that back. And the last thing I would say is we need to devolve power as much as possible to the states, to local communities, etc. This is one of the bedrock ideas of our government. Too much power has been centralized in Washington. There's absolutely no reason why every decision needs to be made in Washington. It can't be made there. And this, as I said before, is one of the reasons we are fighting so vigorously. If California wants to go off and create the People's Republic of California, I say, God bless. You'll be an excellent bad example for the rest of us. But leave the rest of us alone. And those are the three principles that I would fight for as a congressman.
I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here tonight. When we talk about what a congressman is your representative. I'm your employee, every single one of you. Even though we are here in Boulder County, which is my second forum in this county, I know that the registered Democrat to Republican ratio is 4 or 5 to 1. And that's okay. And that's the way it should be, that I'm here to earn your vote and also let you know that I'm here to represent you. I could sit up here all night long and just simply tell you things that you want to hear. I could have sat there all day and said, let's ban fracking. Let's get rid of guns. Let's on and on. Eliminate the wall and let everyone in. I could have said all those things. But what I'm here to do is basically talk to every single one of you and hear what your concerns are and provide you with the best possible quality of life. When we sit there and talk about renewable energies, I'm all for it. Like I said, I put more renewable energy on more roofs in this house, in the state, than anyone else. However, I also understand the cost of it. I understand how much the fact that 7 out of 10 Americans don't even have $1,000 in the bank, and even another $100 increase in your bill would kill you. Those are the kind of things that I had to focus on to make sure that when you go home at night, you're able to survive. You can keep a roof over your head, that you can get a job, and that you can actually put food on the table and take care of the ones that you love. That's what your job is as a representative. Me, my entire life, I've been working full-time since I was 10 years old. I had to. Lived in poverty. And my entire life has been nothing but about customer service and taking care of people. For 20-something years, I've been a director of some of the largest companies in this country. And the reason why I was able to achieve such high levels, it was because basically taking care of the customers and taking care of my employees and making sure that, you know what, you came first. And that's what we need to understand, that this isn't about Republicans, Democrats, whatever. It's about making sure that at the end of the day, we are looking at facts and not making knee-jerk reactions just based off some certain narrative. It's about making sure that you are taken care of. And that's what's important to me. Thank you.
We've now come to the time for closing statements. I want to thank everybody for coming here and being a very respectful audience. You've been terrific. We're going to go in opposite direction of our opening statements. So, Mark, you'll go first, and we'll head down toward Nick. 1 minute.
So thanks to all of you for making your way out today. I hope you enjoyed the dialogue, and I think you get a pretty clear sense of where folks are coming from. When I listen to Peter, what I do respect about Peter is he's willing to say the truth. And that's what I am going to bring to this, is to speak the truth to power and to represent the grassroots voices and to make sure that we all come together. This district has the capacity to show the country what it looks like to re-knit the body politic. So bringing together Democrats, bringing together Republicans, bringing together unaffiliated in a new and different way, and to show the United States in our rural, urban, mountain district what it looks like when we do exciting governance, exciting politics, and exciting policy. And that's what I want to do, because this district can lead in that way. So please join me. I ask for your vote come June 26th, because that's the day that's going to matter. Please represent. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here tonight. The Boulder Rotary Club, it's been a great event. A lot of questions. Unfortunately, I want to say that I wish we had a debate style, because there were so many times up here I just wanted to jump up and say, hold on a second. But that's okay. There'll be time for that. And over the next 6 months, I want to prove to the city of Boulder that you need me as much as I need you. I'm the candidate that's going to basically listen to every single one of you. I'm going to listen to your ideas and try to move the needle. Some of the things we heard tonight, you hear the division still. And that's not what we need at this point in time in our country. I'm excited to be here. And the one thing I said this before is people ask, why should I vote for you? As well, because I am you. And I'm not Peter you, but you. I'm a person who knows what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to share a living room with all 7 of your brothers and sisters. I know what it's like to wonder if electricity can get turned off. But I also know how hard work and the opportunity of this country really can lead to some great things. And that's what I want to preserve for our future and in your children's future. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, let me thank everyone also for coming here as well. This has been a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous forum, and I really thank the Rotarians for arranging this. I think what I want to leave you with is one word, and that word is humility. It was interesting. One of my, actually it was Mark, I'll tell who it was. He said, I know, quote, I know the economic and technological disruption that's coming down your way. Really? Wow. Because the fundamental belief that I have is that Washington and the government doesn't know how to run your life better than you know how to run your own life. And that's the entire basis of the libertarian philosophy, that nobody knows how to run your life better than you do. And one of the major problems we have with the government that we have is that there's a whole bunch of people, career politicians, frankly, Joe, in many cases, who think the opposite, that they know how to run your life better than you know how to run it. What the Libertarian Party stands for is the exact opposite of that. Thank you.
Well, I just want to first say thank you to the moderators and to the folks who organized this debate and this forum. I really appreciate it. Very, very thoughtful questions. The question I get most often on the campaign trail, and I suspect folks here on the stage get it as well, is why the heck would you want to run for Congress? Right? You have to question the sanity or the judgment of anybody who would want to go to Washington, D.C. right now, given the way that we've described it and what we see on the TV screens every night. But in my view, the stakes are incredibly high this November. And when I am asked what is at stake, the one word that I could fairly use to describe it is everything. everything is at stake. I mean, everything that we have fought for, everything that we share with respect to our values is on the line. The dreamers that we talk about who worry about whether they'll be deported from our country, the children who worry about whether they will be safe in our schools, the families who worry about rising healthcare costs in Summit County and from every corner of this district, they are all on the ballot this November. And so from my view and my vantage point, if there were ever a time of people of good faith to stand up and serve, now would be it. And so I am humbly, as Roger said, asking for your vote. I would be honored to be your next congressman, and I certainly look forward to meeting each and every one of you over the course of the next 6 weeks and hopefully 6 months. Thank you.
So quickly, sorry, Joe, I want to respectfully disagree on your last comment. You may have the most experience in the state, but I think I have some of the most experience nationally and on geopolitical stuff. So this is beautiful, and in this next 6 months, we're going to really get into it. But one of the things that shows that is we actually had Bud McFarland come out here for Veterans Day and endorse our campaign. He was Ronald Reagan's national security advisor. But on the flip side, we also had Andrew Young come out and endorse our campaign on the eve of Martin Luther King Day. And if his health holds up, he may be out here in July. Right now, he's going through a crisis, and we're praying for him. But I am Nick Thomas. I am the only federal independent candidate in Colorado, one of the only nationwide, and the best chance we have of threading this needle and bringing the first independent to Congress, to the House, in 40 years. And we need that. This country needs that. This district has the responsibility to send that, and we have the ability to send that, and it's absolutely critical. I will just say thank you for having me. Sorry. I worked for Ron Toop as an intern in 07, as an aide in 08. I worked on Raleigh Heath's campaign. Polis sent me to South Korea in 2009 as a U.S. Congressional Youth Ambassador. We all have experience. This is a special stage, and I look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you.
As you all know, an event like this doesn't come off with just, let's do this, let's make it happen. We had an unbelievable committee working on this. And I would like to thank, from the Boulder Valley Rotary Club, I would like to thank our fearless leader, Constance Holden. Connie, can you raise your hand? And I would like to also thank our exemplary timer, Joffrey Wheeler. Thank you for keeping everybody in control.
On behalf of Boulder Rotary Club, I want to thank our team as well on cameras, Gary Kahn and Fred Hull. Paul Jurdy in the back of the room, Marion Jones, who handled all the publicity, and the great partnership with Boulder Valley Rotary Club and working with you, Kit. I got to end on a personal note, which is that I've spent my entire professional career trying to strengthen representative democracy. And no matter what you think about whether you agree or disagree with this group of candidates, I really admire their courage and commitment. They represent the best of our county, of our district, and it's not easy to run for office these days, and I really admire you. And lastly, I just want to thank the audience for coming out to learn about these candidates, because it's your job to guard our democracy by making an informed choice. I think you have a better basis for doing that now. Thank you.